Hi, welcome to this edition of Let's Talk. This is a show where I love to introduce you to local people who live in our community because I find them fascinating, and I think you will too. So today my guest is someone who has a very long lineage here in East Hampton, a great family history you're going to be interested in hearing about. Her name is Bess Rattray. Welcome, Bess. Thank you for coming.
Thank you so much,
You're
Barbara.
welcome. As you know, I ask my guests to send photos that can tell me something about their lives, and you and I really haven't talked about these, so I'm
Not at all.
interested in finding out all about these photos because some of them are really wonderful. The very first one
Yes.
looks like a whaling expedition, yes?
That is a whaling expedition. And I preface this by saying it's a slightly random selection of photos because my family at the Star office has way more family photos than anybody has a right to. I mean, it's like a clutter of family photos. This one is Amagansett, and the guy with the white beard is my great-great-grandfather. And he was one of the Edwards family from Amagansett. That's Joshua Bennett Edwards. And he was sort of known around Amagansett as one of the last of the deep sea whalers and one of the people who led the whale hunt in Amagansett. So, you know, that their family whale boats are in the Amagansett Marine Museum. And that's one of his sons next to him, and the fluke of a whale. And that would be somewhere in Amagansett, probably around. I should know the date of this whale because the last ones are documented so carefully, but I actually don't know. It's maybe 1910 or something like that.
So tell me about the lineage now. Edwards, this is Edwards.
This is Edwards, yeah. Well, like you, Barbara, our families are connected to a lot of local families. So, and like all of us, we sort of pick and choose the ones that become our more important ancestors.
Well,
you know what I mean?
unfortunately, the women's lines often get lost.
That is so true. That is so
Because
true.
I was surprised to find out that I actually had Osbornes in my family that go back to 1648 or whatever that I didn't know in the
Right.
beginning. So, they marry and then they change their names. And so where's
So
the
true.
Edwards? Tell me about
That's
the
right.
Edwards.
So Edwards is my grandmother, Janette Edwards, married and became Rattray. So she was Edwards from Amagansett, and they'd been in Amagansett for 200 years-ish, something like that. Supposedly had been kicked out of East Hampton Village for naughty behavior or something. I'm not quite sure of that story. But this guy in the photo was married to the Conklin family of Amagansett, and my grandmother's mother was hunting of East Hampton. So we all have a lot of grandparents.
Right.
If you go back 4, 5, 10, 14 generations, you've got
Right.
10,000 grandparents. But in terms of East Hampton, Hunting, Edwards, Conklin, and then of course they were all intermarried.
Right.
So I'm sure you're related to. I have great grandparents who are Gardner,
Right.
Dayton, whatever it is, because if you go back that many. Anyway,
Sure.
Edwards was is sort of closer lineage for us and the one that seems important because whaling is such an iconic thing out here.
Yes.
So my grandmother wrote about whaling, and she wrote about whaling with her father, E.J. Edwards, and they wrote about the exploits of Josh Edwards when he was, in the Bering Sea and in the Pacific and in the Sandwich Islands, which was Hawaii. He had that
Did
adventure.
she have diaries or what do you mean she wrote about it?
Oh,
she just wrote
she wrote a book called Whale Off
Right.
with her father, E.J. Edwards, which was about the shore whaling industry on the South Fork, but also touched on the legacy of those people who, between like the 1830s and 1860s, went deep sea whaling on those long
Right,
voyages out
right.
of Sag Harbor.
Right.
So
They
that
needed to go farther to find them.
they did, and it was a sort of a different thing. They were whaling off a ship rather than whaling from
It's
shore.
so exciting to see the whales offshore now, is it not?
It is. And
So exciting.
I don't know about you, but I don't remember that as much
Never.
when I was younger.
Never saw them when we were kids.
No,
Mm-mm.
it's really frequent now. Though I can't say I've ever seen what was identified as a right whale, which was the one they were going for
Right.
with this whale hunt, and there are very few in the Atlantic now.
But apparently the bunker has
Yes.
bounced back and that's brought them back.
That's right. They say that because of those schools of bunker coming
fascinating.
back, that's why those whales are
It's
coming
very
in
cool
closer.
though, because you really feel like you're looking at the past when you see that.
You
What our
do.
ancestors were seeing, we
Yes.
get to see now, which is very
Yes.
exciting. Okay, tell me about this one. This is
Ah.
a young boy, and it looks like that's a church in the back.
Yes.
And I'm guessing it's the St. Luke's, the first St. Luke's church?
That's right. That is, according to this identification on this photo, the old St. Luke's, that's right. And the little girl at the very back, riding in the back of that goat cart is my grandmother, Janette Edwards, later Rattray. And they lived on Main Street in the village in East Hampton. And I love that picture just because, I mean, it's a goat cart.
It's a great picture. And that is where St. Luke's stands now. So you would have been like in front of Home Sweet Home area or...
Exactly,
Right.
exactly. So that's somewhere between, Home Sweet Home, just before Mulford Farm.
Mulford Farm, yeah.
Yeah, and kids just out on their own with a goat,
Right.
having a nice time. And I love that. I love that picture.
It was a great time in East Hampton not for everything, but
Yeah, not for
for many things.
For kids.
Okay, so tell me about this.
Okie dokie. I love this picture. This is I don't know if you can tell, it's the last day of World War I. It's 1917.
Okay.
And it's my grandfather Arnold Rattray holding a stuffed lamb under his arm. And he's with his brother Jim, and they had both served in the First World War in
So
France.
this is Arnold standing.
Yep.
And his brother.
And his brother. And those are Rattray brothers. There were several Rattrays. And I included that because now Rattray is a local name because Arnold Rattray came to town in 1925 with my grandmother. And so it seems like a local name, and it has been for 100 years. But as you know,
Right.
that's actually recent. And so, but this is where Rattray comes from. They'd served in the First World War. They came from San Francisco and ended up here through marriage.
Do you have cousins in San Francisco?
You know what? I do not have cousins from San Francisco, not close ones. Arnold's nieces married the nephews of Jack London, the author.
Oh, really?
And lived on some ranch out near San Francisco. So I've always thought I need to look them up.
Yeah,
I want to go see this ranch, but that's distant.
fascinating,
It's a
yeah.
bit of a stretch,
It's
but well, yeah,
But still,
Fun.
interesting.
yeah.
And now what about this one?
I love this picture too. In the tall guy in the middle with the rifle is my great-grandfather, E.J. Edwards. And they'd been out gunning and shooting ducks, I think, in
It
that
looks
picture.
like ducks,
or
yeah.
geese, yeah. And obviously this is not the PC thing to be doing today, killing wild fowl like this, but you know, this was a very, very, very common thing, and they were indeed eating wild
Right,
ducks
they
at
were
that time.
eating them.
Yeah, and I love this picture. It's just a beautiful boat. I think it's I should know what it is exactly. It's some sort of a gaff rig boat.
Do you know
very
what
broad
who
bottom.
the other two are?
You know what? I should know. One of them is a Domini, and the other one, the smaller guy with the dark cap is one of the Domini family, and the
Okay.
other one I'm not sure. I should have looked that up before I came here, but I don't know.
That's a great photo too.
It's cool.
That's definitely, I mean, even as a kid growing up, I remember how many duck hunters there were.
Yeah.
You know, that was pretty common.
And like a working boat, you can see it's not
Yes,
just a
for sure.
showpiece.
Okay, and who is this?
Okay, now this is the same guy as a young man with his arms crossed like this.
Right, mm-hmm.
And he was the captain of one of the bunker steamers out of Promised Land, the Promised Land Fish Factory,
Right.
where they caught those bunker fish that we were talking about, that the whales are attracted to. The Edwards brothers, so my great-grandfather and his brothers, I think I don't know how many of them each had a boat. Several of them each had their own bunker steamer, and they would go out as captain of these and catch these bunker. And that was some kind of a prize catch. I think they took the photo because of exactly how many they got that day. I just love that picture. It's an interesting crew.
It's a great picture, and what, early 1900s?
Yeah, this would be, I don't think it's later than the 20s. It's probably even before that. Teens, maybe.
I mean, look at that catch.
Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot.
That was a lot. I remember how that smelled when we would be,
Oh, yeah.
when we'd go down to the bay.
Yeah.
You know, some days if the wind was right, the
Yeah.
smell, and we'd be go, oh, promised land, you know.
Yeah, it was intense. I grew up in the year-round as a kid, and then in the summer when I was older, right near Promised Land on the shore there that had been all Edwards Brothers property on the shore there by Promised Land. And even as a kid, if we went exploring down at the fish factory, it still smelled in the 70s, you know.
Yes.
Even though it had been closed at least 10 years, you know.
Yes. That was intense for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, this is the great lady herself. I admire this woman so much. She was so before her time. I mean,
She
really.
was.
Tell us about her.
So this is my grandmother, Janette Edwards, as she was before she was married in this photo, who married Arnold, the soldier with the lamb. I love this photo because it's actually her passport photo, and can you imagine having such a glamorous passport photo? It's completely nuts. But I love this photo because she was heading out to become a girl reporter. She went to Shanghai and she worked as a reporter as a single woman, 1923 to 25 in there. She was already in her late 20s and hadn't married here in East Hampton and went out on this adventure. And I think it's so interesting because I think partly the idea that you could do that was because it was from this family where they were really quite international with the sea trade and with the whaling trade, where it wasn't strange to have traveled to Asia or to have traveled to the South Pacific if you were in that maritime culture. So I think that's probably why she had the courage to go out and do that.
But for a woman, was quite unusual.
Quite unusual, quite remarkable,
And did she have a college degree?
She had a teaching degree from a teaching college and was briefly a teacher for I think just a year or two, and then decided our family didn't own the East Hampton Star yet at that time, but she convinced the Boughton family to let her send articles back to the Star. And she had a brother, Clifford Edwards, who was in the Navy as some sort of naval attaché in Constantinople, of all things. So she went to Constantinople and filed some reports on what life was like there in the early 20s. Yeah, and then she went out to Shanghai, and it was in Asia that she met my grandfather Arnold, who was actually working in Japan after the First World War. Long story, he'd been in Moscow. And
I remember as a child my father talking about her with reverence.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
So I think at that point she was the publisher of the Star.
That's right, yeah.
And
that's right,
you know, for a woman was quite unusual to be in that kind of position, and so she must have been quite something.
Yeah, she died when I was about 7, but I remember her. She was a very
tall,
very erect, very sort of imperious bearing.
Yes, I remember her vaguely as well, but because I don't know what year that was, but maybe I was in high school.
Yeah, she died around 1974, I think.
So, I was right out of high school.
They partied a lot, though. I love reading her old columns. They ended up taking over the paper in the late 20s, buying it during the Depression. And then my grandfather ran the paper until the 50s when he died, and then she took over. She was editor of the paper for a long time, and then publisher when my dad was editor of the paper for a long time. But she wrote these incredibly long columns for the newspaper.
All about local stuff, everything that was happening in town and local people, and I love reading her old columns. It was
gossipy as heck, but also tons of history, and it's really fun. I really enjoy reading it, and she was really quite a character, and she knew everybody. And I read something really funny. There was an article in the New York Times around the time just before she died, all about how if there was a party in East Hampton, she went to every single party, and she was in her 80s by then, but knew everybody and would not miss a party and didn't want to come home. And she drove a Mustang convertible at the end of her life. I mean, she was out there having fun.
She was probably a lot like my grandfather, who was in real estate, and he knew every family that had lived in every house, and he could tell you who lived there before and before.
Yes, that's
said,
right.
Well, that's the old such and such house.
Exactly, and they did this and they did that, and I heard a funny story about how during Prohibition or whatever.
Those were the days.
They were, I know. I honestly think they had more fun. I really do.
They probably did.
I think there was more of that public social life than we have now because people weren't at home watching TV or Netflixing or whatever.
Exactly. You were out at Clinton Hall seeing a show or whatever, getting together. So
Guildhall, Clinton Hall.
Absolutely right.
Yeah.
Okay, let's look at this one.
So this is cool. This is the so-called Purple House, which was in between the East Hampton Star office.
And you can see up there the star. You can see it on the screen.
So it was next to the East Hampton Star office, and there's a lane next to the Star that's Edwards Lane, which is a private lane where I live now. And this is the Purple House that was where my grandmother grew up. and it was bought by E.J. Edwards, my great-grandfather, for his family to live in. And now there's the wing of the library is there.
Right.
That's named for my grandmother, is
And
in
did
that
they
spot.
not move this house somewhere?
They did. It's called the Hedges House, and it was, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was on Further Lane for a while and then became part of what became Town Hall. I think this is the Hedges House that is the
Oh.
main body of Town Hall.
Oh, interesting.
Somebody can call and correct us, but I think that's what this is. I think this
Okay.
is the Hedges House that went to Further Lane. And
It
then,
was part of the De Menil property.
yes, it was part of the de Menil property. And I think there was talk of it going back to the library property at one point, maybe to house the Long Island collection, and that didn't happen. But it went and became that, I think this is that main sort of lofty,
That
where
makes
the
sense.
supervisor's office
Yes,
is.
that makes sense. It kind of looks like that.
Yeah, and called the Hedges House. And the barn where, on the property I grew up in, behind it was called the Hedges Barn. And so I grew up behind this
Okay.
property, yeah.
And you still live there.
I still live there, yeah, I do, yeah.
And the family still owns the Star. Your brother
Yes.
is the editor, right,
Yes.
of the Star, and
Yeah.
your mom the publisher.
She is still the publisher, though she's not active
Mm-hmm.
any longer
Right.
at 90, but yes.
That's quite a legacy right there.
Yes, it is. She kept writing her column till she was
Yes,
86.
she did. And
my.
now you're writing a column for
And
the
now I
Star,
do a column,
which
yes.
is nice, yeah. Okay, tell me about this one.
I enjoy this picture because it's so very 70s.
Yes, it is.
So 70s. My dad with the crazy 70s pants has got the red hair.
Uh-huh.
And my mom is the little tiny short one with the dark
Right.
hair in the middle. And I see Marlis Dohanis and I see Bill Durham, an artist from Amagansett. And I just like this picture. They're having a very 70s picnic. And we did that a lot. When I was a kid, it was constantly a picnic. This is actually not here. This is a tailgate at Dartmouth now that I look at more closely. This is a tailgating party at a football game before a football game at Dartmouth College. But this was very much the 70s culture of we were outside all the time having a picnic. And my family used to picnic they would picnic almost, according to my Aunt Mary, who's now gone, they would picnic several times a week. It was just normal. At lunch, they would all meet up outside and eat outside. Maybe at Egypt Beach, maybe go to the woods, maybe wherever they were going. It was just a very normal thing to eat outdoors for a picnic, especially for lunchtime.
Interesting.
Yeah. That's almost gone too, and I regret that because
Yeah.
how
But
nice.
that's a great shot. Okay,
Yeah.
now this one is you.
Oh, yes.
I recognize you here.
Yes. I chose this because we're actually at the LVIS fair.
Ah,
And so some things endure. And we
yes,
are,
for sure.
this is 8th grade. I think I am in 8th grade. It's before I cut my hair. I think it's 8th grade, and I'm next to Kate Steinberg and Krista Bistrian, and we are very proud of our boater hats and being
Yes.
youth volunteers at the fair.
Staff.
Yeah,
Good
staff,
deal.
very important people.
Yes.
And it's just sweet to think that the fair is still going and some of
Yes.
these
Long,
things
long
continue.
time.
Yeah.
I don't ever remember it not going because it predates both of us for
It
sure.
does, by
I
a
remember
long
it was-
while.
My mother always was making a cake for the fair every year or whatever.
Yeah, I was in
And
the
then-
cake booth for years.
Were
at
you
the
in the
fair.
cake booth?
I've been bumped out of the cake booth. If you're out there.
Okay, I know
Oh,
who these two are.
yeah, this is a cute picture of my son Teddy holding the sign and my nephew Ellis drinking lemonade. And that is a lemonade stand on Main Street in front of the East Hampton Star office. And I just like it because, again, it's just trying to maintain some of our small town feeling.
right.
And having a
Absolutely.
lemonade stand and hoping people will stop and buy. This is a couple years ago. Those boys are both strapping tall teenagers now.
So this Star office, this building,
Yeah,
was the Edwards Pharmacy.
that's right.
So was that the family? Was that a
Yes.
family building?
Yes, so E.J. Edwards, who was in the gunning picture and who was with the bunker boat, strangely enough, he did all kinds of things. He built a pharmacy building, he built the Star Office building as a pharmacy.
Was he a pharmacist?
He was not a pharmacist, but he must have hired a pharmacist, I guess. He sort of, they did all kinds of things. He was the fire chief, he ran like the water authority at one point. There weren't as many people in town, so I guess you wore more hats, but he decided to build a pharmacy and that became the Star later. The Star moved into it after the pharmacy closed.
It's a beautiful building.
It's
I
a
mean,
really cool building.
If anybody has never looked in those windows, really look inside because it is
Yeah.
a beautiful old pharmacy, you can tell.
It's really cool. There's a cool green glass ceiling that's made to look like some sort of exotic agate stone or something, though it's actually just
beautiful.
glass, and
And the floor, I think, is
beautiful
really-
mosaic floor tile and old woodwork. And I always tell everyone it feels like, 1935 in there.
It
has
does.
it's not changed at
It
all.
absolutely does.
Yeah.
So, so you have 2 kids, right?
I do. I have Teddy, who's in the picture, and my daughter Nettie, who's named actually after Janette, who was in that passport photo.
And
Yeah.
she is in college? No.
Actually, she's a high school senior. She's
Okay.
off at boarding school.
Okay.
And looking at colleges now. And yeah, both my kids they're both adopted from Ethiopia, but they both have family names. I wanted that lineage, connection with them.
You come from a long family of writers.
This is
Are
true.
you one of them interested in writing?
My son Teddy went into journalism this summer. Interestingly enough, that you should ask, a friend of his from 8th grade from East Hampton Middle School decided to found a newspaper. This actually did not come from me or from the Rattray side. Young Billy Stern was a very strong character, decided to found a weekly newspaper. It's called the Ditch Weekly, and they published 10 issues this summer. And Teddy got into it as managing editor in name, but mainly as the food critic and restaurant critic.
Oh, that's great. So how do you get this paper?
Incredible. It's given away for free in the summer, and they're doing it again, and they actually made a very tidy profit, I must say. They sold ads. They published 10 of them, 10 weeks in the summer. It was incredible for a bunch of boys in 8th grade. It truly was.
Where do you buy it?
It was spread around something like 30 different locations in Montauk, and you can also pick it up in the East Hampton Star front office.
So interesting. I didn't
So it'll
know
be back. Yeah, it'll be back for Memorial Day. So Teddy is a food writer, and he did a fantastic job, and super proud. And honestly, it was not like some kind of Tiger Mom situation where this was my idea at all. It came from another family's
Well,
idea.
they grow up in it, so it seems natural to them.
It does, yeah. And my nephew Ellis was also involved, and they wrote a ton. It was a ton of work.
I mean, I thought when you were talking about your grandmother traveling and writing,
Yeah.
it reminded me of your brother, because I remember when he was traveling and writing before he was editor of the paper.
That's true, yeah.
He was sending letters home.
That's true, yeah. He traveled in Africa and did a lot
Right,
of climbing
and
and
they
that
would
kind
be
of
in
thing.
the paper. I used to read them in the paper.
You're right. I hadn't really thought about that.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that idea that there were globetrotters, 100 years ago, 200 years ago, that there was this wider world, and that people
Yes.
knew other parts of the world. I love that. And they would bring home knickknacks,
Mm-hmm.
We have things from China from my grandmother and things from the Sandwich Islands or Hawaii from my great-grandfather. And I just love that it was a backwater, but it was also strangely worldly. So
It was.
this place.
And I think the connection to New York City
Yeah.
has always lent a certain sophistication to this area.
Yeah, I guess that's probably true. I hear from my my Aunt Mary, my late Aunt Mary, about how they would go to the city by boat,
Yes.
actually. And how cool that was. Like if somebody had to go to the hospital, they might actually get on that bunker steamer or some other boat and go to the city by boat, which is amazing.
Yeah, I know my great-grandfather died in a hospital in New York City, so there was a connection. People were getting in and out when they needed to. And
Yeah, even before the train, I think.
yes, yeah, it was fascinating. So what else? Tell me about what you do. What is your?
Oh.
Tell me what. I know you have a pet project right now.
Oh, that's true,
Tell
yeah.
us about that.
Well, my pet project is a nonprofit called the Anchor Society, and it came out of a journalism project we were doing, which was investigating how we could reclaim some of the vitality and energy of Main Street that's kind of lost as the retail scene changes.
Right.
And the idea is that things are pretty quiet in the off season, and we don't have the same year-round vitality and public life on Main Street and Newtown Lane that you will remember and that I remember. And part of that just has to do with the real estate scene. Things are so expensive that unless you can afford very, very high rents, it's very hard to have a presence there. And so we end up with a lot of luxury goods on Main Street, which is great. I'm not saying it's bad, but there's not as much of a mix.
Right.
And so the Anchor Society is finding ways to try and reclaim some of that mix. Our long-term goal is to try and buy a building, as has been done elsewhere, like Nantucket, Vermont. There's other resort towns that have done something similar. And we want to buy a building and found a general store. That will be a hub and a place to buy practical goods as weather.
Right.
And we're doing other things. We've got a winter pop-up, our first one. we're trying to place pop-ups in stores that shut down in the off-season. We have our first open now, and we have another hopefully opening up over the
I
winter.
think that's a great project. We
Yeah.
all miss the 5 and 10. And
Exactly.
Marley's and those stores that we
Exactly.
grew up with that were open all year, and
We do.
we could shop in and get the things we needed easily.
That's true.
Thank goodness for Amazon.
Yeah.
I mean,
I know. Well, this is the thing. We're not trying to go backwards. We're never going to go backwards. But I think if you look at what some other resort communities have done, it's actually forward thinking to think that you can harness the wealth of the community to try and do a few other things.
I think it's great.
Yeah.
I think it's a great plan. It's much nicer to run down to the store.
It is. And we've got a wonderful board. This was sort of came out of an idea of mine, but it's mostly not mine any longer. But I am on the board.
Well, I think that's a great project, and I'm happy to hear that you're doing that. I do have before I end, I do have one question I ask all my interviewees. It comes from James Lipton,
Oh, yeah.
who used to do Inside the Actors Studio.
I remember
loved
him.
his questions at the end, and the one that I always found fascinating was, if heaven exists,
Oh.
what would you like to hear God say when you get to the pearly gates?
Gosh. Obviously, I want God to say I did my best, that I've tried hard and done a lot of work. And I don't know. I think about this a lot. I hope I can help create another generation of good citizens. Being in journalism is actually kind of, people don't think of it this way, but it is part of a public service, and we have a role to play as journalists to help protect democracy on the small scale here in our small town.
Yes.
And on a larger scale. And so I hope that I'm helping to continue that legacy, and I hope it's of value to somebody.
Well, I think you are, and I think it is.
Oh, thank you,
And
Barbara.
I really appreciate you being here with me today, Bess.
What a pleasure.
I want to thank Bess for coming today and sitting down with me for a few minutes. I want to thank LTV and their wonderful staff for making public access television available to us here on the East End. And I want to thank my sponsor, Wayland Filer Attorneys, which are located in Amagansett. And I thank you for watching, and I hope you'll tune in again for the next episode of Let's Talk. Bye.